Alright, in this video I am going to be fixing the bottom panel on my barbecue. As you can see, it is completely rusted out, and I'm going to be fixing it with only things that I have at my house. I want to do this for free. This barbecue is completely on life support. I did do some repairs on it previously, but the bottom has completely gone. So I'm going to make a plywood bottom on this thing, and obviously I'm going to have to notch out around the corners. And in the end, there's magnets on the bottom, so I'm going to have to put some metal on the frontage, and that's about it. So I'm going to use 3/8 inch plywood that I have kicking around, and I'm going to double it up so that it is, I guess, 6/8, 3/4 inch, I suppose. And before I get the plywood cut, I'm just going to remove this really rusted out bottom panel. And there's just a couple of nuts around the bottom that are obviously connected to bolts on the actual panel itself. So once those nuts are out, it's very easy to remove the bottom panel. Now there are other options. You don't need to use plywood. This is just one option among many. And obviously I'm just going to measure out the internals of this for width and length. And luckily this one piece of plywood that I had in the garage is big enough that I can double it up. I think one piece of 3/8 might be a little bit light once it's got the propane tank on it, but doubled up it's good to go. And I'm not doing any fancy cuts with this thing. I'm just going to use the jigsaw and let it rip. I don't really have too many uses for the jigsaw, and obviously I'll measure it in both dimensions and make that cut as well. So pretty simple. Just take the tape measure, measure it out, take a straight edge. In this case I'm just using a level and draw that line, and then once again just use the jigsaw to cut straight down the line there. And that's pretty much it. So that's what I'm going to use for the bottom panel. And then the last thing I'll do is just cut the one piece that's a little bit larger down to the same size as the first piece that I cut for the bottom panel of this barbecue. Now because there's the upright supports, I do need to notch each of the corners out on the bottom panel that I just sort of cut by about 1.5 inches. So 1.5 inches in both directions. And that's to allow the plywood to fit in between the vertical support pillars on the barbecue. And very simple, this is sort of applicable to this barbecue. I'll just make a 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch square on the corner, and again use the jigsaw to cut that out. And then I'll do that on each of the 4 corners, and that'll allow me to mount the plywood into the bottom panel of the barbecue. Just like that. And you can see it doesn't look very good right now, but once I push it on the side, it will be the correct size overall. And later I'm going to get some bolts and washers and put them through. But right now I just have some screws, and I'm going to use that to start with, because like I said, I'm just going to use stuff that I have at my house for this. Screws obviously not the best choice, but like I said, I can come back around with bolts, some nuts, and some washers later. And I could drive those right through where I put the screws, or not. Maybe this will hold just fine. And in the back, I also put a 2x4 underneath the plywood, and I'm just screwing in to the 2x4 because the plywood is sitting a little bit higher than the metal pan that I had in here before. And then I'll just drive some screws through the top of the plywood to connect to the 2x4 that I put underneath it. So very simple, and now it's holding together nice and tight. And I'm just going to draw a circle where the propane tank is, or where I want it to sit, because this is about 1.5 inches higher, which puts the propane tank pretty close to the burner, which obviously isn't ideal. So by doing this, I'll drop it down about 1.5 inches, and that'll allow the propane tank to sit lower. And when you're turning it on and off, your hand won't be in danger of touching the bottom of the barbecue where the burner is. And just because the screws I used went all the way through, and there's some screws sticking out at the bottom, I'm just using the angle grinder to make them a little bit more flush with the metal on the barbecue, so no one's going to get stabbed or kick them or anything like that. And that's pretty much it. Obviously I'm doing this on my driveway, so I need to pick up the screw ends after I'm done so I don't get a punctured tire. And then, like I said, I do need a little piece of metal on the front of this thing, so I took a small piece of metal off the old bottom panel of this barbecue, just cut it out with some tin snips and screwed that in place. And now when the doors close, they can actually latch on to the bottom panel of this barbecue, which is obviously now made out of plywood. And hopefully this lasts for a couple of years. Obviously this barbecue has been resurrected a couple of times now, so I would imagine eventually I'll have to get a new one, but not yet. It's definitely going to make it through the winter, and it'll probably make it through next summer as well, just like this. Maybe I'll see how long it keeps going. New barbecues are kind of expensive. Anyway, that's how I fixed my bottom panel. Thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.